From Segregation to Black Lives Matter, a symposium in celebration of the opening of the Joel Buchanan Archive of African American Oral History at the University of Florida. It seems like my voice is getting louder and louder, but we had just such a wonderful day today, full of panels, reminiscences, people talking about the spirit of Joel Buchanan, feeling that we're kind of channeling him in a certain way. What Joel was all about was bringing people together, telling tough stories, not holding back from the truth, but at the same time believing that powerful history should be used to build community. And so we're just so delighted at the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program that so many of you have traveled a long way to be here, and some of you from our own community. And we have a wonderful keynote event tonight. Curtis Austin and Derek White are going to talk to us. I'm going to introduce them. If you have a program, I'm not going to read what's in the program. I want to tell a couple, hopefully not too embarrassing, personal anecdotes about both of them. But I also want to remind you that the format for this evening will be that I will do the introduction. Professor Austin will give the keynote. The title is The Greatest Threat, the Black Panther Party and Revolution in America. And then we've asked Professor White to do a brief kind of commentary. And then we'll open it up for Q&A. And then we have a reception planned for you just right downstairs. Wonderful food. It's absolutely free. If you want to give me a few dollars, no, I'm just kidding. It's free. It's free. I forgot this is being live streamed. Now I've just made a national disgrace of myself. Sorry about that. And I also want to let you know that we have 2 more full days of events. And tomorrow we'll be back at Smathers Libraries, and I'm so delighted that Dean Judy Russell is with us tonight. She's going to moderate a panel titled Remembering Joel Buchanan. And that's going to be, I assure you, that is going to be full of emotion and power and spirit. And then Dean Russell and her amazing staff at Smathers Libraries are going to do what is in many ways kind of the centerpiece of this entire 3-day event, and they're going to unveil the Joel Buchanan Archive of African American Oral History. And these wonderful stories that we've been hearing, Mrs. Mickle, Albert White, and so many others telling their stories, are going to be available now for a global audience via Smathers Library. So we're so grateful for that. So these 2 great scholars speaking tonight. I'll talk first about Professor White from Dartmouth College. The anecdote I have about him is that one day I got a call from a colleague, a law professor in Canada. And I was just getting ready to start my sabbatical year to finish my book. And I wanted to kind of withdraw from the real world, if you will, so I just been writing. So this colleague says, "Hey, Paul, I found a tape recording of C.L.R. James giving this speech about this guy by Oliver Cromwell Cox. Are you interested in this?" And if you know me, you're like, "Well, yes." And then I'm thinking, who can I get to work on this? And I'm thinking, there's this great scholar I know who's just written a wonderful book called The Challenge of Blackness, the Institute of the Black World. And one of the highlights of the Institute of the Black World that comes out of, as Zohar Simmons can tell you, the Atlanta SNCC Project. And it was this amazing experiment in connecting community to the campus. Walter Rodney, Sylvie Winter, C.L.R. James would come and speak, right? And so I called Derek right away. I said, "Derek, help me out." And so Deborah Hendricks actually brought this tape back to life. We redigitized it. And it was just a lovely speech by one of the greatest intellectuals of the 20th century. And our graduate students got to work on it. Our undergraduates got to work on it. And C.L.R. James is talking about W.E.B. Du Bois. He's talking about, the great revolutions of the 20th century. He's talking about the origins of capitalism. And our students got so much out of it. So Professor White, I just want to thank you for that amazing collaboration. It was published in, what was the journal?
New Politics?
New Politics, right. It came out a couple of years ago. And then also, he's an indefatigable teacher and advisor. In fact, I asked him to be an outside dissertation committee member for Raja Rahim, who many of you heard this morning. And so I want to thank Professor White for doing that, as if you didn't already have enough work. But that's meant so much to us here. Professor Austin from the University of Oregon, we also have an equally kind of personal story, which is that our connection is really Mississippi. Professor Austin is a native Mississippian, and the person who brought us together, Professor Austin and her students in the Proctor program, is a remarkable civil rights organizer by the name of Margaret Block. And if you are affiliated with the Proctor program, or you know anything about the civil rights movement, you've heard about probably Sam Block, who is Margaret Block's older brother, who is this really iconic SNCC organizer. But Margaret, in many ways, was just as important. And a project organizer for SNCC in Bolivar County, Mississippi, and actually in Akinyele Moja's book, We Will Shoot Back, Margaret Block is actually featured quite extensively as a person who teaches people how to defend themselves. And I'm just so grateful to Professor Austin, because early on when we took our students, and every summer I take a group of UF students to the Mississippi Delta to do interviews with veterans of the civil rights movement, Curtis came down and actually spent time with our students, talked with them, gave a history workshop, gave us a lecture on the movement, and then revealed to me that he was also Margaret Block's godson, right? And so I think she had more than one, because she was a mother of the movement. But I'm just, again, so grateful for you for spending time with our students. And so again, Professor Austin is going to go, and the title of his keynote is called The Greatest Threat, the Black Panther Party and Revolution in America. Please join me in welcoming him from the University of Oregon.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Paul, and thank you to the Sam Proctor Oral History Program and the rest of the University of Florida community. I am very pleased and honored to be here. We had a few technical difficulties, so I appreciate your indulgence, but hopefully we'll go on a crazy ride. I like going on a crazy ride, and I should just say from the beginning that maybe 75% of what I'm going to be saying to you tonight is based off of oral interviews. And some of those oral interviews have words that some people might find offensive. And they are words that I definitely would not say in front of my mom. But my mom is not here. So, and she is not on Facebook either. So I think those little parts that I'm going to say, I hope you'll forgive me for quoting people directly, but I think they feel and sound better when the person is able to speak for him and or herself. And you'll see exactly what I'm talking about when I get to that point. And I don't know, maybe I'll get a spanking or something. And I've got plenty of them, so I can take it. It's no problem. So yeah, tonight I'm going to be talking about the Black Panther Party and revolution in America. And it's going to be a little bit different than a lot of the stories we've heard today. Many of you probably have heard of the Black Panther Party. Many of you probably had some interactions with the Black Panther Party. And I want to talk about the context in which the Black Panther Party developed. And of course, we know that that context continues to exist today. The Black Lives Matter movement emerged because that context has not disappeared, and we're still having to deal with some of these difficulties. And you see a woman here holding a sign that is, it's really simple, but it's really powerful. I think it's really powerful. I mean, the problem is that Black people, for the most part, have not been treated like human beings in this country. And one of the very, very important pieces of evidence of that claim is the fact that we get indiscriminately killed. And I don't have to go into a lot of detail about that for you, but for example, you know this person. We'll be hearing a lot about July Perry on Saturday. But actually, I took this picture yesterday after I got off the plane and was coming up to Florida. I stopped in Orlando and went to the cemetery and thought that I would remind the Florida audience that this doesn't just happen in other places. And it's likely that you didn't need to be reminded of that, but I thought I'd do it anyway. And besides, I taught at the University of Central Florida in the late 90s, and I remember working with the Democracy Forum, working on the Ocoee piece, and decided, you know what, I'm going to go by and see July Perry's gravesite. But there are other people, the Moores, Harriet and Harry Moore, who were also killed Christmas Day, 1951, taken to the hospital in Sanford, Florida. And, you know, Harry died first and Harriet died 9 days later from a bomb exploding under their bedroom. And then you see I have an image of Trayvon Martin there because he too died in Florida. So again, I know I don't have to remind the Florida audience of that, but it felt like creating a local context would be better for what I have to do. All of us have seen the image of Emmett Till. He too died in the 1950s as a result of racist violence. And many of you probably saw the Ebony/Jet magazine that went around the world and showed what the people there in Mississippi had done to him because he allegedly whistled at a white woman. We know now that he did not. If you've read Tim Tyson's The Blood of Emmett Till, and you've seen the fact that they've reopened this case once again. So being treated as less than human has been like part and parcel of the black sojourn in the United States. Now, a person that you probably are not familiar with is a man by the name of Clyde Kennard. Clyde Kennard's crime was to attempt to enroll at the University of Southern Mississippi. And he had been a veteran in the Army. He had fought in World War II. He was a paratrooper in Korea, came back, decided he would use his GI Bill and enroll at the University of Chicago. And he did, and was doing great for 3 years until his father back in Mississippi died. And so he had bought his parents a farm and went down to Mississippi to help his mom secure the farm. And rather than driving the 15 hours back to Chicago to go to school, he decided to drive the 15 minutes down the road to Southern Miss. And actually, it's interesting because they accepted him and admitted him, but it was a mail application. Of course, they didn't ask for a picture. So he shows up and it turns out he's this guy. Well, to make a long story short, my timekeeper has told me he was going to keep me on task. I'm just going to run right through that and say he wasn't treated very well for his crime of trying to enroll at the University of Southern Mississippi. He was framed, accused of stealing 2 bags of chicken feed. He had chickens on his farm too. And arrested, brought to court, convicted in about 10 minutes, and sentenced to 7 years hard labor in Parchman Penitentiary. And 3 years into that 7-year sentence, Clyde Kennard was dead just because he wanted to go to school. And by the way, I've seen his transcripts, and he was an excellent student at the University of Chicago. And I just have to say, I went to the University of Southern Mississippi. It's an excellent school, but so is the University of Chicago. So I'm sure he was qualified to be there. We've heard this story quite a long time ago, and it still resonates with us. What we've now come to call the 4 little girls were killed in Birmingham, 16th Street Baptist Church, because they wanted to help with the movement. We know about the children's movement in Birmingham, but actually they were changing clothes between Sunday school and church the day the bomb went off, and they too lost their lives. But it's not just black people that this was happening to. Any white person who deigned to support black people, we call them allies today. I'm actually not sure what they would have been called in the 1960s, maybe crazy, because sometimes they were treated worse than the black activists. And we've heard of the story of Andrew Goodman. We've heard of the stories of Jonathan Daniels, and here you see Viola Liuzzo, who came down to help with the Selma to Montgomery March, and some Klansman decided he didn't like that and opened up on her on Highway 80. In 1965, she was ferrying marchers back to Selma from Montgomery, and it turns out there was an FBI agent with the Klansmen who knew who did the shooting, and still, you know, the prosecutions are few and far between. Right on, right on. Thank you. Thank you. So a lot of killing and a lot of people kind of getting off. We've seen Malcolm X stand up and speak. Of course, we've seen Malcolm X cut down when he spoke. And after Malcolm X's assassination, we see the movement start to take a pivot. And so by the end of 1966, things are getting really hot and heavy. And people are wondering if the approach that they're using is the only approach they need to be using. And so we'll actually start to get into the meat of the talk here and look at what's happening in October of 1966 with the Black Panther Party. The Black Panther Party founders, Huey Newton and Bobby Seale, are looking around and they're seeing all these things I just talked to you about. They're reading it in the newspaper. It's on the evening news. People are talking about it on the campuses there in Oakland, California, and they want to do something about it. They want to join in with the people who are out registering people to vote. They want to join in with the people who are out trying to integrate these lunch counters. They want to help folks who are trying to integrate schools, but they don't want to do it nonviolently. All right? They decide that that's a bit much. So actually, they're just kind of hanging out one day having a political discussion, and they run into this guy named Mark Comfort. And Mark Comfort had gone down to Alabama because he was from Alabama to help. What's that big hurricane that hit in '65? Betsy? Was it Hurricane Betsy that hit the Gulf Coast in 1965? Was it Camille? Hurricane Camille, thank you, sorry about that. So he went down to help with Camille, and while he was down there, he runs into these people in Lowndes County, Alabama, who are doing voter registration, and they're trying to start their own party, and he meets John Hewlett, who starts the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, and John Hewlett gives him a bunch of flyers, and he takes those flyers back to Oakland, and Huey Newton and Bobby Seale bump into Mark Comfort as he's going to and fro, and he has these flyers, and one of these flyers has his image on it. And they've been talking about what kind of organization they could start. And they say, well, we want to start an organization like that party. And so they literally steal the image and the name. And right there on the spot, they become the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, and that image is with us to this day. And again, they decide that they don't necessarily believe in this notion of turning the other cheek. So that's not the only thing that they're about, but it's kind of the only thing I'm going to be talking about today because my time is limited. I'll just give you a very brief image, and I'm going to show you a video clip of Angela Davis, who's going to explain and contextualize the rest of what I'm going to say. But they actually decide to use their 10-point platform and program to kind of guide what they do. And you can see right there at the very top, self-determination. They want to control their own communities, which is not a bad thing, right? Anybody who lives in any particular community wants to control it. There is nothing wrong with wanting to be fully employed. Nothing wrong with wanting to avoid exploitation. It was quite common in the Oakland, San Francisco Bay Area to go to the grocery store in the black community and buy quite expensive, often day-old moldy bread. And you can go to Walnut Creek or Pleasanton or another very nice community in the area, Marin County, where very wealthy people live, and get that bread for half the price, and it's fresh, right? So they're being completely exploited. Obviously, I don't have to go through this whole thing, but the point was to show you that it's not until point number 7 that they start talking about the issue that's really causing the black community major problems. In the 10 months prior to the founding of the Black Panther Party, 11 people, black people, are killed in the San Francisco, Oakland Bay Area. The oldest of these murder victims is 82. The youngest is 11. So now we've heard of the Mike Browns and Sandra Bland's, and I mentioned Trayvon Martin, but these things are intermittent. Imagine having one a month, right? And so they are starting their organization in this particular context, and they're saying, we're going to do the same thing that SNCC doing, we're going to do the same thing that CORE is doing, but the cheek-turning days are over. And so I think that Angela Davis is a little bit better at explaining this context than I am, and so I hope that I can get back to this, and if not, I hope somebody will come up here and help me get back to it, because I've got to get out of this screen in order to make this happen. So give me one minute to figure this out. So.
First of all, if you're going to talk about a revolutionary situation, you have to have people who are physically able to wage a revolution, who are physically able to organize and physically able to do all that is done.
Yeah, but the question is more, how do you get there? You get there by confrontation, violence?
Oh, was that the question you were asking?
Yeah.
You see, that's another thing. When you talk about a revolution, most people think violence, without realizing that the real content of any kind of revolutionary thrust lies in the principles and the goals that you're striving for, not in the way you reach them. On the other hand, because of the way this society is violence that exists on the surface everywhere, you have to expect that there are going to be such explosions. You have to expect things like that as reactions. If you are a black person, live in the black community all your life, and walk out on the street every day seeing white policemen surrounding you. When I was living in Los Angeles, for instance, long before the situation in LA ever occurred, I was constantly stopped. No, the police didn't know who I was, but I was a black woman, and I had a natural, and they, I suppose, thought that I might be a, quote, militant. And when you live under a situation like that constantly, and then you ask me, you know, whether I approve of violence. I mean, that just doesn't make any sense at all. Whether I approve of guns. I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama. Some very, very good friends of mine were killed by bombs that were planted by racists. I remember from the time I was very small, I remember the sounds of bombs exploding across the street, our house shaking. I remember my father having to have guns at his disposal at all times because of the fact that at any moment someone we might expect to be attacked. The man who was at that time in complete control of the city government, his name was Bull Connor, would often get on the radio and make statements like, niggas have moved into a white neighborhood, we better expect some bloodshed tonight. And sure enough, there would be bloodshed. After the 4 young girls who lived, one of them lived next door to me. I was very good friends with the sister of another one. My sister was very good friends with all 3 of them. My mother taught one of them in her class. My mother, in fact, when the bombing occurred, one of the mothers of one of the young girls called my mother and said, can you take me down to the church to pick up Carol? We heard about the bombing, and I don't have my car. And they went down, and what did they find? They found limbs and heads strewn all over the place. And then after that, in my neighborhood, all the men organized themselves into an armed patrol. They had to take their guns and patrol our community every night because they did not want that to happen again. I mean, that's why when someone asks me about violence, I just find it incredible. What it means is that the person who's asking that question has absolutely no idea what black people have gone through, what black people have experienced in this country since the time the first black person was kidnapped from the shores of Africa.
So you get my point, or perhaps you get Angela's point. And she's basically saying that you can equate it with violence if you like, but self-defense is a natural human reaction. And this is exactly what the Black Panther Party got into as soon as they got things rolling. What they would do is to patrol the police. If the police came into the black community, they'd get in their cars and follow the police and make sure that they didn't brutalize or kill anyone. Huey Newton was in law school at the time, so he had some understanding of the law, in many cases a better understanding of the law than many police officers, and they would stand the requisite, actually the law said you needed to be standing about 25 feet away from an officer while he was engaged in his duties, but the Panthers would stand about 100 feet away, and they'd yell over to the person, "Hey brother, hey sister, we're the Black Panther Party, don't worry about it, we're watching, making sure you're staying safe." And of course the police didn't like that, and quite often they would be like, mind your own business, get out of here before I arrest you, and sometimes they would attempt to arrest Panthers, and especially if it were at night, they couldn't see them 100 feet away. And when they showed up, they would be able to see that the Panthers were armed. And of course, there were no arrests. Well, you remember the point I made about the murders that took place in the 10 months prior to the founding of the Black Panther Party in October 1966? From October 1966 to October 1967, there are exactly 0 murders of black people in the Bay Area. And so you can see how effective that strategy was. No shootouts. Nobody got hurt. It was just a black organization saying, we're going to defend our communities. And that's essentially all it took. And you can see a picture of 16-year-old Bobby Hutton here on the screen, who also participated in those police patrols. But the Panthers were a very, very local group, and most people didn't know about them until May of 1967, when the police had gone to their local assemblyman and said, do something about these people, because we don't need them following us with these guns. And so they decided they were going to pass a law saying you can't carry guns around. Imagine that, right? And that's what the California General Assembly decided to do. Don Mulford, who was their local assemblyman, wrote up this law, and they were going to debate it and get it passed. Well, the Panthers decided that they were going to leave Oakland and go to Sacramento and watch them do this and kind of probably do some catcalls and, mess with them a little bit. And so probably about 30 of them. There's a caravan of cars that drive the 80 miles from Oakland to Sacramento. And they get there, and the governor, who's Ronald Reagan at the time, is standing on the State House lawn having this talk with some middle school students, some 4-H students. And so think about this now. You can carry guns at the time, but it's actually illegal to carry loaded guns in your car. And so you got these 6 or 8 carloads of black people dressed in black. They've got their berets on, and they pile out of their cars and they start loading their weapons, right? And there's Ronald Reagan right there. And Ronald Reagan sees that, and he takes off running. He leaves the kids right there, he's not trying to save anybody. And this is on videotape. If you want to try to go, you go check it out. It's kind of funny. He's got a pretty good clip there too. He's not crazy. So they go and they decide, we're going to go inside. The kids are like, can I hold your gun, mister? And they hang out with the kids for a minute, but they go inside the Capitol and they're immediately lost. None of them have ever been to Sacramento, and they certainly haven't been in the State House. And they're asking where the viewing gallery is so they can watch the debate on this bill. Well, they were actually mistakenly directed to not the viewing gallery, but the assembly floor. So you got all these legislators, and these black people with these guns on the assembly floor, and they're talking about this bill to get rid of guns, right? And This is actually not from an oral history. It's from a newspaper reporter, but it's one of those nasty words. So here it comes. It's actually the first line in my book. I love it. My mom hates it, but I love it, okay? So one assembly person stands up and yells, "Who in the hell are these niggas with these guns?" And then he takes off. Like, he doesn't stand there and wait for an answer. He is out of there. Well, it turns out it's actually not illegal to be carrying weapons in the Capitol in California. They actually see this all the time, but it's usually white gun clubs, you know, John Birch Society types, and that kind of thing. But because all of this is being videotaped, it makes the evening news. And the Black Panther Party leader there, Bobby Seale, is going to read Executive Mandate number 1. And he's saying that black people are being murdered every day and we need to arm ourselves and defend our community. And Bobby is going on and on and on. And that organization goes from one with about 25 or 30 people in Oakland to a national organization overnight. People are calling from New York and New Jersey and Washington, D.C. and New Orleans, and there's going to be a Black Panther Party in Cleveland, Mississippi, if you can believe it. People want to be a part of this organization, and it's not just men who want to be a part of this organization, it's women too. In fact, by about 1971, women make up the majority of individuals in the Black Panther Party, and by 1973, they had the majority of the leadership in the Black Panther Party. So sometimes you hear that the organization is just, you know, this group that of black men, thugs who want to go around killing white people. Nothing could be further from the truth. It was a group that had, you know, a good gender balance to it, and they were not interested in killing white people at all. What they were interested in doing was protecting and serving the community. And one of the things I like to point out about that is they create all these different programs to serve their community, and one of them is a free breakfast program. And the reason we know they're not there hating white people is because they go to the local grocery stores in the communities all over the Bay Area and ask these white grocery store owners for food and sometimes for money. And invariably, they donate to these programs. And so without these white businessmen funding Panther programs, there would be no programs. And certainly I might not be here because the government saw that this program was going so well that it decided to take over and create its own free breakfast and free lunch programs. And a lot of times I went to school because I knew I was going to have a free breakfast and a free lunch. You know, class was kind of not a part of the picture. But people knew that the Panthers were not only going to feed them, but talk to them about the political situation in their community, and the government did not want them doing that, and so they tried to put a stop to it. Another very important program that they had were their free health clinics. And these free health clinics abounded. Again, they basically went to college campuses, found white med students, white doctors, white nurses, and said, hey, listen, we've got X, Y, and Z problem in the black community. Can you come out and help us solve these health problems? And again, invariably, these people would say yes. And so I submit to you that if white people at the time thought that the Panthers were out just to kill white people, I doubt they would have been helping them to operate their two signature programs. I mean, they wind up feeding about 20,000 children every day, and they have these free health clinics all over the country from mostly volunteer white doctors. Sometimes the doctors would train Panthers and they would divulge this health care, but usually not. And so the organization starts to grow because of its impact on the community, but it was growing slowly. It starts to take off like a rocket in 1968 though, because when Martin Luther King is killed in April of '68 in Memphis, you have a lot of people, white and black, trying to decide whether they want to be a part of the movement. And a lot of people are having difficulty with this nonviolent philosophy. I suspect that a lot of you would have difficulty, not the people that were part of that movement that made the momentous changes that made my life so much easier, but for those of you who don't have that kind of discipline, and I would submit courage, I can be really brave with an M16, right? But if I'm sitting there in Klan country in Mississippi where I was born with nothing, I don't know. You know, that's scary, and that's probably a little bit harder to do. So we're not saying that that's a weak way of approaching the problem. It's probably a much more courageous and brave way of approaching the problem, but in this case, to each its own. And so what happens is those people who are on the fence about what they should do, after King is killed, the nonviolent apostle of love is violently assassinated, people decide, I'm going with the Panthers or something like them. And actually what you get, people don't want to be associated with the organization, so they come in as underground members of the organization because, again, the organization is experiencing quite a bit of repression. And that repression is coming from the White House by way of the FBI. And what the FBI decides to do is to destroy the Black Panther Party. Of course, it also tried to destroy SNCC, the NAACP, and so many others. And the FBI comes up with this program, the counterintelligence program, and it's going to be their blueprint for getting rid of groups like the Panthers. And this is what they kind of are going by, the image you see on the screen. They don't want, for example, somebody like Martin Luther King to rise up, prevent the rise of a messiah that can electrify people. And so you get rid of Malcolm, you get rid of King, you get rid of a whole lot of other people. You don't want groups working together. And so you create all of this dissension and antagonism between organizations. And you don't want them to be respectable. And so you discredit them on TV and in newspapers and in magazines. And what I found in my research on the Black Panther Party, just about 2/3 of everything we read in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the major news organs of the period that have the Black Panther Party as a subject was either written by people in the FBI or by people who the FBI recruited to write these stories. And so most of what we know about the Black Panther Party, if we get it through what historians are trained to get evidence through, we probably don't know as much as we think we know, right? Because the FBI is not likely to tell the story in a very accurate way. And so one of the things it does is to say to Congress that this organization is the greatest threat to the internal security of the United States. And because it's the greatest threat, we've got to do something about it. And we know that all of this is bogus because there was a break-in in Pennsylvania and a lot of FBI documents were stolen, and they were not redacted like the ones, if you request them today, there's going to be a lot of black stuff on it. You won't be able to read it. But these were fresh documents, and we know that the FBI was up to nefarious ends when it comes to black organizations, and especially the Black Panther Party, because not only did they want to imprison and discredit them, but they wanted them off the street, and they wanted them off the street by any means necessary. So the FBI leader, J. Edgar Hoover, basically unleashed his people. And when I say his people, I don't mean just FBI agents. What I mean is local police departments and sheriff's office all around the country to go in and attack this organization and its leaders. And what we can see is they were very effective. This is the leader of the Los Angeles chapter of the Black Panther Party, Alprentice Bunchy Carter. Bunchy Carter was very effective at recruiting not just black people from South Central Los Angeles, but very intelligent white students from UCLA. He was actually at a meeting at UCLA the night he's murdered. They're there to discuss the founding of the new Black Studies program. There's an altercation that takes place, and at the end of that altercation, Bunchy Carter and John Huggins, another leader in the Black Panther Party, are dead. And what we see is that particular branch, I should say chapter of the organization, kind of fizzles out not long after that. We also see the same thing happening in the Midwest with Chicago in December of 1969. Fred Hampton is the leader, the Minister of Defense of the Illinois State chapter of the Black Panther Party. He has not been accused of a crime. He is not suspected of any crime. Nobody thinks that he's committed a crime. It's just that the FBI and by extension, the state's attorney's office and local police don't want him around. So at about 2:30 in the morning on December 4th, 1969, they go to his apartment to assassinate him. And Mark Clark, who's a defense captain from Peoria, Illinois, is there guarding the door. And the police knock on the door. He says, "Who is it?" And they respond, "Tommy." And he says, "Tommy who?" And they say, "Tommy Gunn." And they start to spray the apartment. And one of the first shots that they release hits Mark Clark right in the heart, and he dies. He's holding a shotgun there to guard the door, and the shotgun goes off and through the ceiling. And that's the only shot out of 100 that the Panthers got off that night. And they make their way through the apartment, find Fred Hampton in his bed. He's actually asleep. And he's asleep because another FBI informant by the name of William O'Neill has drugged him with, according to court records, enough barbiturates to kill an elephant. So he doesn't know all this shooting is going on. But they find him and they, corral all the other Panthers into the kitchen. And again, according to trial transcripts, what we know is that there's this conversation that goes on in the bedroom. Is that Fred Hampton? Is he dead? And they look at him and say, "No, he's not dead yet." And then everybody hears these two shots from a .45 automatic. And then after those two shots, somebody hears, "Well, he's good and dead now." And in fact, he was. That's Fred Hampton at the end of the line there. Again, not suspected of any crime. And here are the police bringing him out of the apartment. And you can see how pleased they are with their work. And so when I say that they wanted to get rid of the Panthers, it wasn't just that they broke up marriages, they did. It wasn't just that they got people fired from their apartment, from their jobs, they did, and got people kicked out of their apartments. They did that, but they also sent people to jail for life. And when that wasn't enough, they killed people. And so the Black Panther Party thought that it was important that they defend themselves. They didn't need all this to happen to believe that. They thought that from the very beginning. But what we see happening is people feel like their lives are threatened, and just being willing to defend yourself perhaps is not enough. And so they begin to shoot back. I think my time is winding up, and so I'm going to fast forward a little bit and stay on task here. But you have this one guy. His name is Elmer Geronimo Pratt. He's from Louisiana, Morgan City, Louisiana. And he's gone to Vietnam twice, actually, and actually serves a tour in the Dominican Republic. He is in the U.S. Special Forces, but he gets out of the military and he can't find a job. And the Panthers are saying things that he likes, and so he gets recruited by Bunchy Carter, the person who I told you was assassinated. And once Bunchy Carter is assassinated, he actually takes over the Southern California chapter of the Black Panther Party. And along with a person I'm pretty sure you know, Eldridge Cleaver, they decide that the Panthers need to go on the offense. Like, self-defense doesn't seem to be solving the problem. And so Eldridge Cleaver absconds, leaves the country, but he's sending information back to the United States about what people need to be involved in. And so this is where we see the ultimate beginning of something that becomes known. It's a Panther structure, but it's separate from the Black Panther Party. And it becomes known as the Black Liberation Army. Perhaps you've heard of Assata Shakur, who was a member of the Black Liberation Army and continues to live in exile in Cuba today. But the Black Liberation Army decides that unless we put pressure on the people that are putting pressure on the black community, this is never going to stop. And it's not a pretty subject to discuss. Some people find it crass, but as a historian, I can tell you that often black people are asked to do things that no other people on the face of the earth are asked to do. If you look around planet Earth and see who has what, you'll find that whoever has something fought for it and got it. They didn't just sprout up out of the ground and have their own community. They didn't just sprout up out of the ground and have their own country. They fought for it. And the best example of that is this country, right? Nobody voted to get the United States of America. There was some shooting and fisticuffs going on, right? And some guerrilla warfare too. And the black community wanted to have some self-determination, and they thought the way to get that self-determination was to stand up and fight. And they did stand up and fight. They obviously couldn't be going to a 9-to-5 job and doing this, and so what they did was to rob a lot of banks. And they robbed banks all over the country. And they had a program that said, basically, the next time an 11-year-old, a 12-year-old, a 15-year-old is killed by a police officer, then that police officer is going to be dealt with. So what you have in New York City, for example, is children hang out on the roofs of buildings. They can't get to Central Park for whatever reason. And sometimes the police will show up, maybe they're drinking, maybe they're shooting dice, but the penalty for that is not death. And often you get police officers throwing little kids off the roof of a 60-story building, and that being okay. Well, the Black Liberation shows up and says, that's wrong, there's a consequence for that, and here is that particular consequence. And so in addition to robbing the banks, they also begin to assassinate police officers. And we can see just one example here in 1971. Rocco Laurie and Greg Foster are killed in New York City, and they are known, according to members of the BLA, of course, as people who have mistreated individuals in the community. And so they were dealt with as a result of that. Also in New York City, we have Joseph Pagentini and Waverly Jones. And I'm actually, there are lots of individuals who fall victim to the Black Liberation Army, but I've shared these two with you because of their race. You see, one's white and one's black. Up until the Black Panther Party, actually up until the rebellions, 64 in Harlem, 65 in Watts, and basically there are 212 rebellions all over the country, right? I can't list all the cities. After these rebellions, they thought that, hey, maybe if we have some black police officers, they won't treat us that way. Well, they were actually wrong about that. So that actually didn't work. I have one last story to share with you and to kind of contextualize what I want you to hear. But here, and it's going to take longer than the 1 minute I've been told I had. So just bear with me here. So here's a guy I interviewed. He was in this organization. Actually, he says he's not in this organization. Because this is being live streamed, I have to say I believe him. But, he says he doesn't know anything about it. But here's a quote from him. He was saying that the LAPD started using helicopters to try to find him. And he said, we just start shooting at the helicopters. Then we'd read in the newspaper where the police were whining and saying, whoever's out there doing this stuff, they're just a bunch of cowards. Well, they were just trying to pull us out in the open. And we were just like, F you, we're going to shoot at your effing helicopters. We're going to shoot at your fire engines. We're going to shoot at your friggin' ambulances. Everything was a target. And before you know it, police, they just weren't comfortable anymore. And so they wouldn't come into our communities. And they'd go to the seniors in the community, the mothers in the community, and say, I know y'all know some of these people who are part of this stuff. I know y'all know these folks. Y'all need to talk to them and tell them this is a dangerous game they're playing. And he says those old people would tell them, we don't know shit. So not going to be, we support what they're doing. And so this might sound like bombast and bluster from a radical who's embellishing his past, but there are statistics that show that in Los Angeles, for example, between 60 and 65, there are about 20 police murders. But between 65 and 70, there are about 400. So I'm not saying that the Black Liberation Army was involved in all of that, because the Black Liberation Army was actually a community group, but they were obviously doing some things like you see here on the screen. And the last story that I want to tell you actually brings us all the way up into the 21st century. I'm actually working on a book on the history of the San Francisco 8. And the San Francisco 8 is a group of 8 former Panthers who were arrested in January of 2007 for a crime that took place in San Francisco in 1971. And they decided that they were going to attack a police station, Ingleside Police Station. And they go down to the police station, they cut a fence right near the highway, and they sneak through the woods and go into the police station and they shoot it up. But there are not that many police officers in the station. Why? Because right before they go to do this, they bomb the Stonestown branch of the, what is that bank? The Bank of America. They bomb the Bank of America, and the police rush out of the police station and go check out this bombing. So not that many people in the police station, but they did leave a couple of people behind, and this gentleman winds up getting killed in this attack. And so this is August of 1971, and the next day they send this to the New York Times, not the New York Times, the San Francisco Chronicle. They say, on the night of August 29, 1971, revolutionary violence was committed against the Ingleside pigsty as one political consequence for the recent intolerable political assassination of Comrade George Jackson, in particular, and the inhumane torture of inmates in POW camps in general. We retaliate against these acts along with the constant murder and brutality of black people in their communities. We must not forget nor allow our oppressors to continue brutalizing our families and friends, brutalizing families and friends of our incarcerated comrades. And they sign it the George Jackson Assault Squad of the Black Liberation Army. So they never discovered who did this. And in 2007, they arrest the 8 men that they thought did this, hold them on $13 million in bail. Eventually that bail is reduced to somewhere around $5 million, and they're able to get out. But that's 2007. And because I'm out of time, I'm gonna run to the end of the story. Well, now they're in court. And you know, as a part of a court case, there's something called the discovery phase. And in the discovery phase, their lawyers are asking for particular documents from the San Francisco police, particular documents from the FBI. And the prosecutor, David Drewliner, says, we don't have those documents. Except 6 months later, he'd show up with about 30,000 pieces of paper and dump them actually literally on the floor of the court. And this went on for years, 2007, 2008, we don't have those documents, and they show up with 20,000 pages. 2009, we don't have those documents, and 8 months later, they'd show up with another 40,000 pages. At the end of this case, there's some 300,000 pages that they said they didn't have to begin with. And the judge got so upset with what he considered obstruction, he didn't charge them with obstruction, but he told them if they continued to obstruct this case, that he was going to have to cut the defendants loose. And so they continued to ask for the documents that they knew existed because of that break-in, and the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security refused to give those documents up. And in September of 2010, they released all of these men. But what we see happening is there are divorces among them. All of them lose their jobs. One of them has his pension taken. They literally destroy their lives. And so even though they don't send them to jail for life, they do wreak havoc on their lives. And so the point here is that registering people to vote, desegregating a lunch counter, integrating a library or a school is excellent. I'm glad that those of you who are in the audience did that, who did that. I'm glad you did that. I got an excellent education in an integrated school in Mississippi. So thank you for doing that. But I also think it's important to thank people who thought that there were different strategies. And we are often made to be ashamed to talk about, to study, and to write about this part of our history. Well, most of this happened, I was 3 when this case, for example, I just got through talking about, happened. I wasn't there. This happened whether I was born or not, right? And it's important that we talk about it and discuss it because, like the person said in a session this morning, if we don't sit down and talk about it, the options are not that good. They're just not that good. We don't have to be bitter, but we do have to have a discussion about these issues. And speaking of discussion, I hope you'll have questions and or comments for me, but I do want to be mostly respectful to the time and shut it down and say thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Great job. Oops. All right. I don't have any fancy slides, so I apologize. I got Curtis's paper here. Let me go this. Sorry. First of all, let's give a round of applause for that powerful and important talk by my friend and colleague. Oh, I'm too loud. Thank you. Professor Austin, I learned something more. Every time I've heard him give, I don't know, dozens of talks on the Panthers, and I learned something every time, which is a testament to his work and his detail. And so thank you, Curtis, for that important and powerful message. I also want to thank Paul Ortiz for allowing me to come in and try to follow Curtis, who's talking about the most revolutionary organization in American history. So I appreciate that, because that's a small obstacle and hurdle for me to overcome. So let me, when you're asked to give a commentary and you're like, well, what am I going to say behind Curtis? And I knew this was coming. I thought about thinking about how do we tie this into our broader understanding of oral history, the Buchanan archive that will be unveiled, and something that I think is close and personal to me in my own work. I wrote a book about an organization called the Institute of the Black World. And it was a collection of scholars, literary scholars, historians, political scientists, all who came out of the movement, out of SNCC, out of the Northern Student Movement, and came together in Atlanta to really try to move the civil rights, black power struggle, black freedom struggle forward after King's assassination. And so I think of it as important, a way of thinking about this, because this is not in my notes, but I want to say this, is that I too sent an email, has anybody done the Freedom of Information Act? It's a very precarious kind of process. I sent an email right before my dissertation, a letter. I was like, I'll send this letter, maybe it'll be here in a year, right after I'll be ready to turn it into a book. They sent me a letter back really quickly saying, we have nothing. We have nothing on this organization. And I was like, okay, well, that may be true. It's IBW. Vincent Harding has a PhD. There were no guns, right? It was And then literally a year later, I get a packet with about 1,000 pages of FBI files. Just randomly shows up in my office that someone had finally decided to fulfill this request. I don't know how, I have no idea how that works. It's a black box. And so I can imagine, in this case that you talked about at the end of the San Francisco 8, there's the 300,000 pages. That makes me think that there's probably a lot more where that came from. But in the early 1970s, in the shadow of the Black Power movement and the Watergate investigation, historian and theologian Vincent Harding wrote a declaration about the mission of a black scholar. His essay, The Vocation of the Black Scholar, outlined the goals for black activists and intellectuals during the politically charged era. What is the purpose, and what was the purpose of the scholar of those times? Harding called for black scholars and their allies to align themselves with the community, speak truth to power, identify problems, and remember the possibilities for the future are rooted in analysis and understanding of our past. Harding would write, quote, "For those black scholars who recognize their profound relationship to the ongoing life and struggles of the larger black community, all work is a pathway to the next stages of struggle. All history moves us towards the future. All analysis of the contemporary setting seeks to find ways in which we may be situated for the next times. To speak truth is to speak of our future, for our children. For our children are the people, and we must speak imaginatively, speculatively, and responsibly to the issues of their terrain." End quote. So the oral histories collected in the Buchanan Archive of African American Oral History here at the University of Florida reflect the fulfillment of a vocation. A decade ago, I was awarded the Julian Pleasant Visiting Visiting Scholar Award, which is the first time. And I had the opportunity, and I want to thank Paul for this, that I randomly show up in Gainesville to start this research project, and I get this meeting in which I had met Mr. Buchanan and others in the Gainesville community had done so much. And so that was not part of my planned event. I don't know if it was already scheduled. I just showed up at the right time, but it was such a moment, a warm moment for me as a historian and as a scholar. And as I heard Mr. Buchanan give these stories about his experiences as the first black student to go to Gainesville High that we saw a little bit in Gator's Tale, and talks about his time here at the University of Florida, I realized that he was providing his testimony. And one of the most powerful parts of the African American religious tradition is the role of testimony. It is the moments when parishioners bear witness to their blessings. But as historian Kadida Williams and others have noted, that testimony was also political. It was the creation of public knowledge for black communities marginalized by the historical profession, and in the scholarly production, oral history becomes and became our testimony. It became a way to restore agency to black communities. Oral history, from the least of these, formed and forms a counter-narrative to the racist assumptions of black pathology and servitude that had dominated the historical narratives of African American presence. Now, Vincent Harding has described African American history as a river of struggle, and I think that's an appropriate and apt metaphor for us to understand this weekend, as earlier we saw and we heard from activists and local activists who, as you said, integrated schools. As I'm the byproduct, I'm younger than Curtis. I just want to put that out there. As a person younger than Curtis, as a beneficiary of this activity, this activism, this courage, and at the same time, I'm also definitely aware of the various strategies. And I think that when we think of river and Harding's river metaphor, I think it's the way that we can both understand Buchanan's work and his belief in telling the stories of Gainesville, and Curtis telling us the story of the Black Panther Party that was a national organization. And how do we understand these separate threads? That this story, this testimony, is not always going to be uplifting. As I always remember sitting at watch service, for those who don't know watch services, when you're a kid, watch service is the thing you didn't quite understand while you were at church. I see somebody, at New Year's Eve, and you're like, it's past your bedtime. But when you think back on those moments and you've experienced those moments, you realize that's the part where you hear both the joy and the pain of black life, that for you and your family members, things that you didn't know come to the fore. And in many ways, I think that, as Curtis has outlined in the various ways of the Black Panther Party and the Black Liberation Army, that we need to tell these difficult and complicated stories. That the stories of African American triumph to simply overcome segregation gives us a limited narrative. We also lost a lot, right? It comes with cost, personal cost, institutional cost, right? Not only just in the dead and the dying, but we lost materials. As I hear students talk about, and former students of Lincoln High School in this town tell this story about the value of this institution. It is phenomenal to think about what we lost in trading. There's a study that came out recently in the last, year or so that said that if a black student has a black teacher, it increases their odds, like doubles their odds of going to college. One black teacher. So what is the trade that we have made in this equation? Right? That's a difficult conversation to have. It's a conversation that colleges all over the country are struggling with today. At predominantly white institutions, like where I work, students are marginalized. They are second guessing their responsibilities, their presence on the very campus. Across the South, I see students having to walk past and figure out how they're going to deal with Confederate monuments. Right? And at the same time, they have black football players and basketball. It's too soon for that. Florida's about to play, so I'm not going to. It's too soon. Too soon. But that's a question. What have we gained and what have we lost? What strategies were we willing that were used, that were effective, nonviolent direct action, and what things were we willing to change and say enough? And I think that the river metaphor that Harding developed while he was in the Institute of the Black World, in many ways was a way that the organization had operated, tying nationalists and liberals and Marxists all together in one organization in an attempt to move the black community and the black movement largely forward. And so I want to end, because Curtis used a lot of time, just to be honest. But for those of us who've seen and read Curtis's book, I knew that was coming, so this is good. So thank you, Curtis. Harding, from there, the river, talks about the risk of hope in his work. He writes, quote, "The only history I know is one that drives us into the future, moving like a river towards our best possible evolution. So I'm willing to take this history of my people as a sign of all human possibility. I see the way we have come, the chains we have broken, the visions we have maintained as a broadside invitation to all people," end quote. And so one of the key lessons from the Buchanan Archive and from Curtis's lecture is that history, and African American history, bears witness to both the ugliness and the possibility of America. In many ways, it is a
People are put in jail. The reason people are fired from their jobs, the reason people are killed, is so that they become so demoralized that they quit. But if you look around this room and you listen to some of the oral histories in this new archive, what you'll find is people adapted and they overcame despite the hardships. They lost a lot of friends. But look at me and you today. They continued to sacrifice, and we get to benefit from it, and our children's children are going to benefit from it. So I can't say go out and do X, Y, and Z thing other than get a lawyer, but I can say whatever it is you're doing or that they were doing, don't quit, because that kind of thing doesn't happen if you're doing nothing. And it certainly doesn't happen if you're doing something wrong. Only when you are right do you get that kind of reaction. And so you and your cohorts are on the right path, and I would say keep going. Yeah.
Yes, my name is Reuben Brigady, and speaking in terms of oral history, we heard Mrs. Mickles speak, and I just want to relate the fact that oral history, Harriet T. Moore was her second cousin.
Hi, I had a question for you as a scholar who works in this era. What do you think of Maulana Karenga and his legacy? Sorry,
She's asking,
he's going to repeat my
what I
question.
think of Maulana Karenga and his legacy.
Yes, because on the one hand, there's Kwanzaa, which I think is a really important holiday, but every time his name comes up, there are lots of issues around his involvement with U.S. and the Panthers, the abuse of women that he was convicted for. Can you provide any other your thoughts on that issue or him as a
Yeah,
person?
I'm certainly not for the abuse of women, and he went to prison for that, and I think rightly so. So I think that justice was done in that case. Maulana Karenga formed an organization called the US Organization. And the US organization, like a lot of 60s era organization, was thoroughly infiltrated by local police departments and the FBI. And part of the infiltration for Karenga's group meant the death of a lot of Panthers. And when you ask me what I think about Karenga, I'm in an organization with him. I respect him. I don't celebrate Kwanzaa, but I don't celebrate Christmas either. So I mean, what are you gonna do? I think his legacy is important. I use his Black Studies book in my classes. I don't hate him, but I do think he is a complicated and in cases, like you mentioned with the going to prison for abuse of women, problematic historical figure, and it's important to work that out. I don't hate him. I don't think he is the devil. I do think he would benefit from some soul searching because we now have the documents that show what us members were doing. We have documents that show him in the mayor's office, in Mayor Yorty's office in Los Angeles, making plans for the Panthers. And I'm not sure those documents were forged. So what I think is there's some reflection that he would benefit from. Yeah.
Hi. I was hoping, towards the end of your presentation, you touched on the shame associated with discussing the Black Panther Party and the Black Liberation Army. Could you elaborate on that a bit more? And also, how do you think going forward we can address an issue such as that?
Also, how do I think what now?
We can work to address that.
Okay. I'm an oral historian too. I directed the oral history program at the University of Southern Mississippi for about 7 years before I moved on to direct the Black Studies program there at Southern Miss. And I think it's got to be personal, you know. And in my own personal life, I decided I was going to write about the Black Panther Party, but most of my professors insisted that I write on the NAACP. They said that I was going to get in trouble if I did that, and they said that I would not be respected if I wrote on the Black Panther Party, and they said that it would come to nothing if I did that. And I did not want to write on the NAACP. I'm a member of the NAACP. So is my mother and a lot of people in my family. But I was interested in doing that. And so part of what I'm trying to say is a lot of times people try to make me feel bad for raising what some might consider controversial issues, right? There is nothing wrong. If I leave this podium right now and go, this young lady looks like she has a walker, and go and assault her, I guarantee you that I won't get out of here alive, right? The natural reaction that she's gonna have and that the people around her is going to be, get him off of her, get him away from her, and they're not going to write a petition to do that, right? They're just gonna do whatever comes to mind. And so I just think that we need to be fully human. As human beings, we are sometimes happy, we're sometimes sad. Sometimes we do the right things, sometimes we do not. Sometimes we do good things, and sometimes we do bad things. We can't pretend that we are somehow above the fray. And I think in order to live a fully human life as a professor, we have to discuss issues that make people uncomfortable. Like we don't have any problem saying thank you for your service to people who who knows what they're doing. I actually have a brother in the military. I actually know what he's doing, and I don't thank him for his service. I mean, he's a bad guy, right? He is. He's up to no good, I'm telling you. And we have our first responders, right, who we are supposed to identify with and, pay homage to. But I'm not going to pay homage to Darrell Wilson. He killed Mike Brown. Why would I pay homage to that? And the people who are killing our brothers and sisters in some of these other places. And so I don't think there's anything wrong with being human, because it's human to want to live. And so what I would say to that is that if you want to live a half-life, continue to pretend that some of this dirty stuff in our history didn't happen. But if you want to live a full life, let's put it on the table, discuss it, and see what comes of that. And I think dialogue is going to be the key.
One more question. We will continue the discussion of the questions as we go downstairs, and I think Mr. Attorney Dew will have the last.
I just want to make a comment that Angela Davis and her sister, Fania Davis, is still involved. There's a way to fight this mess besides picking up the gun. And they have developed a program called Restorative Justice in order to carry on the struggle. So I don't want you to think that, the Black Panther Party is dead. It's just now working in another format.
Thank you very much.